Welcome to MedTech Disruptors. My name is David Philby. I'm the founder of Elevra Consulting. On this show, we interview commercial leaders who have taken a disruptive technology from early phase through to launch or even merger and acquisition. It's all about the journey, the highs and the lows, how to create new markets, what is high performance culture, the risks and rewards, and leading commercial teams in growth companies. We hope this gives you good insight and advice on how to advance your own career. Welcome, and I hope you enjoy the show. This week I was joined by Ben Lundgren, former CEO of On Target Labs. An amazing perspective from someone who went disruptive and won. We talk about how to assess that first big career move going to a startup. Once in, the challenges of bringing new tech into the OR and how partnerships can go right and wrong. And finally, creating winning cultures. Let's get into it. Welcome, Ben. Thank you for coming on the show this week. It's great to have you. I've been excited about this chat since our last chat, and it feels like it's a great time in your career to be having this conversation. So thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Absolutely, David. Excited to be here and excited to have the conversation with you.
Awesome. I guess firstly, it would be great to start with you introducing yourself, who you are, what you've been doing, and what you do.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. So my name is Ben Lundgren. I have been in the health technology space for over 20 years. Did a number of years in consulting, but outside of that, I've really been involved in bringing new technologies to market, whether it's on the biotech and the medtech side of the marketplace. And most recently, just finished a really successful run as the CEO of a novel startup called On Target Laboratories.
Yeah, wow. Let's get into this, because this is the reason we're here today, to talk about the On Target journey. You did 6 years with On Target in the end. First, could you say what is the product and what was it that you guys were bringing to market?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a fascinating product story. Sometimes you encounter these in your career where it just takes a sentence and people are enamored by what the product is. But the company was founded about a decade ago on the concept of there needs to be ways that we can make cancer surgery more efficacious, more precise, more accurate. And the product is essentially a very simple idea where a patient receives an IV infusion prior to going into surgery, and that infusion circulates systemically, binds to the cancer cell, and then when a surgeon is looking to remove it, it illuminates the tumor intraoperatively in real time in the moment the surgeon is making those very consequential decisions on behalf of the patient. And one of the things that's fascinating about this is if you look at the history of surgical oncology, we have found all sorts of ways to identify, to tag, to mark, to provide some type of visual cue to surgeons so that as they're going in, they can have that much more information to inform their intraoperative decisions. All of them rely on preoperative imaging. They rely on human intervention. They rely on an interventionalist or a surgeon or a healthcare provider placing a marker. There's a human component. And really the core element that was just so novel about this technology was let's replace the human component with a biologic component. Let's use the biology of cancer to identify it as opposed to relying on the amazing healthcare providers and giving that responsibility to them.
So this is a complete innovation on something that's been susceptible to human error previously, because it's completely controlled by some human element in the build up to surgery, and completely takes it out of that into a biologic. So this is a first of its kind product in the industry. Because my next question was going to be what did the market look like that you were going into? It sounds like we're almost making a market here, the first of its kind. Is that right?
No, you're correct on that. In probably a great way to illustrate the significant step change that we're talking about when we talk about this technology is to look at the phase 3 data that was produced. It actually resulted in the FDA approval of this product, Cytolux. And if you looked at the phase 3 study, there was a comparison versus standard of care today, which is effectively what the surgeon can see with their eyes and what they can palpate or feel with their fingers. And how often was cancer identified in that setting versus in a setting where this technology was used to eliminate or to identify the cancer? In over 50% of patients, there was some type of impact, whether it was identifying the primary lesion of interest, informing the margins, identifying additional cancer that was not known previously. So we are talking about a very significant change, a transformational change, quite honestly, in the way that surgical oncology would be practiced. So it was a significant change. We were building a market and continue to be building a market today. There is, in the indications that the company is currently pursuing, there is nothing on the market that has this type of capability or has this type of benefit to patients as well as to surgeons.
That's awesome. So you joined the company 6 years ago, and ended up in the president and chief executive officer role. Let's go back to the start of that. You said the company is about a decade old. When you joined the company, what did On Target look like? What stage were they at? How big were they? And what was the role that sort of you had come in to conduct initially?
Yeah, and it is helpful to think about this. And if I give you a little bit of context of where I was coming from,
Hmm.
I had spent a large portion of my healthcare career at Johnson and Johnson, and so it was coming from large pharma, large medical device, and so was accustomed to a very well established leading market leading environment. And the opportunity to join On Target came across my desk, and at first glance, the technology was just exciting, and the potential to be part of something that was this transformational was very motivating. And I remember when I joined, I was the first commercial hire, and so I joined a company that was primarily scientists and chemists who were very very good at their craft. I was hire number 13, and I remember, maybe to give you an interesting story on what the environment was like in at the company when I joined. Going through the interview process and speaking with a lot of the leaders of the company, and I remember having a conversation with one of them, and he asked me, "How do you commercialize a new technology?" And usually, you're in an environment where you're expecting someone to ask you an interview question where they are seeing if you know the answer, where they have
Yeah.
that already figured out. But as we started to have the conversation, it was clear to me he was asking me not to see if I knew the answer. He was asking because he was very interested in what that answer was.
Yeah. This
I
wasn't a
want you to tell
test.
me because I don't know.
Yeah.
So it was an environment where I recognized, there was some risks there, but there was an opportunity to make some tremendous impact given the skill set that I brought to that team.
Yeah.
They knew science, they knew chemistry, they knew clinical operations very, very well. But they needed to have that additional capability brought onto the team that knew how do you begin to take a new technology and prepare it for market release, build a market that doesn't exist beforehand, and build the advocacy and the enthusiasm in the surgeon hospital community to begin to adopt. Because we all know that there are a lot of great technologies that, without that type of preparation and strategic work, never were able to take off and to take flight.
So this was your first major career move from the, I'm going to call it the safety net of J&J, right? You've got systems, processes, hierarchy, you've got everything around you. Doesn't mean everything just runs perfectly, but it does mean that people are in boxes regardless of how much, you take, how much responsibility you take on. How did you assess? Because every commercial executive at some point makes this move for the first time, um, and has to assess the risk and reward of the product, the company, leadership. What were the things that you assessed that made you believe that On Target was the risk you were willing to take?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for your listeners, it's probably appropriate to be, fully transparent as you talk about that transition, or even the idea of bringing new technologies to market, building a market. Sometimes we throw that out there and we sort of paper over it, and we don't talk about the bumps in the road and the challenges and the difficulties and the lows and the highs that you encounter when you embark on that journey. Um, there was no doubt there was some trepidation in making that leap because I had operated in a world where everything was curated. If you needed,
Yeah.
an expert in market access, you went down the hall. If you needed to
Mm.
have, a collection of agencies that would provide you best in class service, they were already curated for you.
Yeah.
Everything about J&J is a contained, controlled environment. And stepping out into a startup world, you have none of that. And the question is, can you be successful on your own? And can you be successful in that world? And so is you make that jump, you need to be very thoughtful about when you do that, which was, I think, an underlying implication of your question. And I knew the unmet need was substantial based on my time in surgery and the
Mm.
time that I'd spent in the OR. This was in cancer surgery. This was the number one thing that the surgeon wanted to do. You talk about
Mm.
and how much of a surgeon's mind share is devoted to the idea of taking the cancer out. It was an inordinate amount. And you think about what a surgeon does when they finish the surgery. They go in and they talk to the family. What's the first question the family member asks? They say, "Doctor, did you get it all?" So
Mm.
that conversation and that need to be confident in that environment was top of the surgeon's list. And so I knew that. So I knew we had an unsolved, significant, meaningful unmet need.
Right.
As I looked at the technology was had some strong, compelling early data. There was a clear signal that there was something here that could really be transformational. So I had some confidence there in those two pieces. And then as I spoke with the team, they had done some pretty incredible things from a clinical standpoint, from a scientific standpoint, from a chemistry standpoint. And so at that point, I felt like I could de-risk a lot of the pieces that were generally out of my control as a commercial leader.
Mm.
And then it was really a question of, can I de-risk the commercial side? How much confidence do I place in my stock that I can step in and bring that type of capability and that this can be a tremendous.
Did
Uh,
you have to look at things like like and before you accepted the role? I mean, did you have to look at things such as like how much is it going to cost to produce to ensure that this was ever going to be a profitable product, or is that something that
yeah,
they were maybe going to say no, that's you for you to figure out, Ben? That's why we need to hire someone like yourself.
yeah, and they had not done a lot of work around pricing, so that was an unknown. There was some
Yeah.
ambiguity there as to what a price would be appropriate for a product like this. Um, I was able to rely on my pharma experience at J&J, knowing the type of product that this was. It's a small molecule, and having a general understanding of what appropriate margins are and manufacturing costs associated with a product of that type and design.
Mm.
So I relied on a lot of that to really be confident that we would have a decent business model there that we could really make some money on. I think so from some of those pieces, you have to make some judgment based on your past experience. You're never going to know everything about the company before you
Yeah.
make the jump, and so it's a question of what risks are you willing to take, and what things do you really have to investigate fully before you make the move. I think in my experience, um, people first, technology second. And if you can check those two boxes, then those are the two most important.
Yeah. Fair. You mentioned that when you were joining the company, it was ultimately the scientists and technologists who had brought the company through the first 4 years and were attempting to bring this product to life. Um, did you feel that they had um, any appreciation for the commercial strategy at that point, or did you feel that was almost an opportunity for you to go in and go, this is a really great chance for me to go in and actually have an opinion and make change and guide strategy rather than just executing strategy?
I think they had a healthy appreciation for what they didn't know,
Mm.
and so as a result, it was a team where I was able to come in and provide a perspective that voice hadn't been at the table historically, and so I
Yeah.
was able to provide that voice. It wasn't always the voice that prevailed, but it was important to have it in the conversation as we made decisions, particularly those that were cross-functional.
Yeah.
I also found that we had a fair amount of catch up to play. So if you think about the normal development process and when commercialization type of activities begin, there were a number of activities that we should have started earlier that had been neglected, and so there was a high degree of catch up that we needed to play, so that when FDA approval came, and I think we were hopeful that it would, that we would be prepared to take advantage of that. Because as you know, in especially in a startup world, but in life sciences general, but more importantly in the startup world, urgency is such an important characteristic and mentality. Time is a precious resource that you don't want to waste or to miss. And so being able to take full advantage the moment you got that FDA approval was something that we had set up as a goal for us as an organization.
Mm. Time ultimately equals cash in in those early stage companies. So
It's always a timeline, right?
yeah,
It always
I,
is.
I think you made a really nice point as well, that when you're coming from a commercial perspective, looking at a startup, and you're talking to a founder who is either scientific or a technologist, it's okay for them to not necessarily understand their commercialization strategy if they have humility and they are willing to go, I don't know, and we need help, and therefore we're willing to sort of move out the way and learn and listen to what you're going to bring to the table, rather than this sort of, I don't think it's arrogant, but I think it's naivety. I think that there's a lot of technologists that will they just fall in love with their own product and the belief that it's going to change the world, and actually it could cause problems. But humility in founders is so important when scaling a startup.
Yeah, and I would argue that character trait is important in leadership across the board.
Right.
Founders, CEOs, being able to listen to other voices and then be able to make that evaluation as to what road to take after you've been able to listen to all of those voices is so critical. Being blinded by our own experience, by our own perhaps our own ego,
Yeah.
is always something that never results in the right decision.
Yeah, 100%. So you joined the company, commercial hire number one.
Right.
Um, what was the initial role? What was the initial responsibilities that you came in to do? What did that startup need at that point?
Yeah, so I joined as the VP of Marketing and Business Development, and so a lot of it was in J&J parlance. We would call it strategic marketing. So all of the upstream activities. What are we going to name the product? How do we think about a website? How do we think about the key messaging and positioning for the product? Do we have a clinical trial that will produce the data points that will allow us to have a compelling message to communicate to surgeons and to hospitals and to patients afterwards? So it was a lot of those type of activities as we were beginning to ensure that the messaging, the positioning, the data generation, the naming, all of those pieces were appropriate. The other thing that was really fascinating about this product, just from a commercialization case study point of view, is the product needs an imaging system to illuminate it and to see it. And there was a decision made, again, a scientific decision made early on, that using light that was in the visible spectrum of the human eye was really not going to provide the results and the transformational impact that the company was looking for, because that restricted the visibility of that dye to the surface of the tissue. And the moment you went below the tissue surface, those wavelengths just couldn't penetrate and couldn't really be visible.
Right.
And so we had a dye or that illuminated or was visible outside of the visible spectrum of the human eye. And so you needed a camera, a device that could then pick up that light spectrum and then show that to the surgeons on a screen. So we had a device that was needed to be used in conjunction with our imaging agents so that the surgeon could receive the full benefit. The company had looked at making their own devices, and I think rightly so made the decision early on that that was a complexity that was far beyond their capability or their funding. Being able to develop a new imaging agent, which is effectively going through a drug development process,
Yeah.
in parallel with developing a brand new device that would be used exclusively for use with that imaging agent was just a Herculean task. And so the other piece of my job was around how do we build relationships with major medical device companies that created and built and marketed these surgical imaging towers so that they would work in conjunction with our imaging agent. So there was a high degree of partnership that was involved in that portion of the commercialization and a complexity that was really not typical in every medical device technology or pharmaceutical technology.
So you have to then convince an existing medical device company with an existing setup and product to, in addition, add technology and even give up space for your product just to be how did you go about that? How long did it take you to get a partner lined up that or was it multiple partners? What was that journey like just to get
Yeah,
that set
the
up?
aspiration was multiple partners. And so the aspiration was let's have a suite. Let's have every imaging system that's used in the OR, regardless of which hospital you're in. We would love for them all to have an
Right.
indication, right? That provides the largest market opportunity, the greatest TAM for the technology.
Yeah.
Um, but there's no doubt. I mean, as we were thinking about building a market, a piece of that was how do we build belief and conviction amongst the imaging tower manufacturers, the Strikers and the Intuitives and the Olympuses and the Stores of the world. And an interesting story. I'll sort of relay this. It was a process that took years because we not only were trying to build their interest and their commitment, but that required that they actually had to make some investments. And so this had to be something that was compelling enough that it was above the line on all the other opportunities they might be pursuing to drive and to grow their business. We wanted them to have an indication for use of Cytolux. And so that required generating data and filing with the FDA and going through a considerable amount of work to make sure that they could have that type of claim associated with their product. And so the story is when we first started, we were, I think, had this aspiration to be used in across imaging systems. We didn't want to be tied down, which I think is a very logical conclusion to come to as a startup. You want options are valuable and you want to keep those options open. So a lot of our trials were done on with a system that was a startup company out of Israel called Vision Sense. And they were acquired towards the end of our clinical trials by Medtronic. And so we had a situation where we had a lot of clinical data that was generated on a system that was now owned by Medtronic. And we thought, that's a great starting point. We'll work informally with them, and it'll be something that will allow us to be a stepping stone to broader use across multiple imaging towers.
Right.
And about 6 months after that commercialization or those trials completed, and we had an FDA approval. 6 to 8 months, the Medtronic made some changes to their portfolio, and as every major med tech company does, they rationalized and they invested other places, and they made some changes. And one of the changes was they pulled this imaging system from the marketplace. So we found ourselves in a situation where we had an amazing set of data, we had an incredible product, and we had our tower partner who was going to image this technology was now not involved commercially, and they were walking away from it. Truly an existential threat to the company. And luckily for us, we had developed other relationships, and we were able to pivot quite quickly. But one of the things we learned from that is we're going to need to have a partner that has a deeper level of commitment to us, at least in the beginning. And moving to being available on every tower or in every system was not something you could do straight out of the gate. And you needed someone who was committed, it was fully invested, and you were going to have to commit to that. And so we made a pretty significant strategy shift. And we were saying, well, let's find the partner that we think would be most committed, is fully invested in this space, and let's build this together. And then we'll see what we're doing. But we have to have someone that has a commitment to what we're doing. Otherwise, we open ourselves up to what just happened with Medtronic that could potentially just be disastrous.
Wow. And initially, so you had this imaging agent, that's your prime purpose, right? And then you take the moment to realize that you need the right device to make it as useful as possible, and therefore have to partner with companies. I guess firstly, at that point, was there a time where the initial product could have become unviable because of the cost or loss of profit by having to have a device partner and using their tower and all their technology just to make it work? Was there ever that challenge that you had to face?
The that was a conversation that I'm sure happened before I joined, when there was discussions
Mm,
about, do we make our own tower? Do we make
right.
our own device? Do we wrap all this together and own the entire product that we bring to market? I think when we shifted towards this idea of partnering, very quickly we recognized, these imaging towers that we're going to be partnering with have broad applicability across multiple indications, multiple use settings in hospitals and in the OR. So it wasn't about having them purchase or design a tower that was bespoke to Cytalux and that one application. It was about, how do we bring the Cytalux capability to an imaging tower that has 15, 20 different indications and a multitude of applications that
Yeah.
exist in large measure already. And so that became part of that shift when we moved away from doing something proprietary to doing something.
Yeah. And then so after the Medtronic news, classic startup, unforeseen circumstance, panic and chaos for a while, I'm sure. Um, you took the decision to be more strategic in your partnerships and get high commitment from a partner that would ride the journey with you. Um, how easy was that to do, to get, a concrete relationship, and how keen were companies to do that with you?
You know, we had incredible data. And
Yeah.
so there was clearly a hook that, hey, being part of something like this, we all know that cancer is often an area that many of these medical device companies focus on. It's
Yeah.
an area that has tremendous unmet need, high morbidity, high mortality. And so there's an allurement to be a part of that, to
Right.
be involved in cancer, to be a cancer company. And so we had a hook that we were able to take advantage of. Um, but as you know, as a startup negotiating with large multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies, that takes a lot of work and a lot of time.
Yeah.
So there's no doubt that it took work, it took time. Uh, but I think one of the things that I saw through that process, the partner that we ultimately went with, we had a long relationship and trust with a lot of the people that were our one-to-one contacts on the ground. And so that was critical. And this is maybe a lesson in just business development and negotiating deals. Like, having that foundation of trust allowed us to, when we had impasses in negotiations, we were able to brainstorm in a very authentic way to find ways to get around them. And we were able to resolve those and ultimately sign an agreement and move forward in a very collaborative, and I think what's been a highly productive commercial collaboration.
Yeah.
But it took months to do that, but it was only successful, and it was only possible because of that trust that was developed on the front.
Yeah. Awesome. Talk to me about the the company after that partnership and bringing the product to market. Where's the company now? Where's the product now? And how big is the commercial function? And what's it doing now?
Yeah. So I think now, as you look forward, the company has a small commercial footprint, so a sales organization, a handful of sales reps, marketing, education, market access function. So we went from employee number 13 is when I joined, and now the company's about 35 employees. And so more than doubled. And a lot of that has been building out the commercial organization.
Yeah.
The benefit of having a partner, um, is that you're also able to take advantage of, leverage the commercial capabilities that they bring to the table. So I think the company's been able to bat above its weight because they're also able to lean on the vast amount of resources that exist in the partner that they're using to bring this to market. And so that's been a great accelerant for the company from a commercial standpoint. And so as you look at the first million, the second million, the third million, all of that has been able to come faster because there hasn't been the requirement to build and invest on the front end 100% out of the pocket of the investors.
Yeah, that makes sense. With through that journey, you've now, we talked earlier about how at one point you're leaving a J&J to go to a startup, which takes incredible assessment. Now having ridden that journey, the journey that so many people want to do, they would love to be able to follow in your footsteps and pick a great company, a great product that makes it every time. But unfortunately, that's not how it works. What was the culture like, and what kind of sort of character traits and personalities did it take to sort of ride the waves of that journey?
Yeah. Culture was so important, and quite honestly, before taking over as CEO, I think I maybe didn't fully appreciate how critical it was. I think it's job number one for every CEO, having looked back at my experience on Target. Because culture overrides everything. We talk about strategy, we talk about execution, culture overrides. It's an umbrella over top of that. And the culture that we tried to develop it on Target, and I say we, because there's no doubt that the leader sets the expectations and an example. The culture is created by the entire team, and if the team doesn't buy into that culture and fully embody that culture, then you don't have a functioning culture. So it was something that we developed there on Target. One of the things, there were a couple of things that were critical to it. One was this idea of continuous improvement and agility. So the example of the imaging tower coming off of the market and having to pivot quickly, that is such an important asset to startups, and one that if you don't take full advantage of as a startup, you're not going to be able to reach your full potential. Being able to pivot quickly and to be continually looking for improvement and ingraining that into every decision-making process that you have as a company.
Yeah.
A second area is this idea of no hierarchies and being able to have open conversations across the organization. And we designed the organization in such a way that it was incredibly flat. So I, as a CEO, had multitude more direct reports than anybody else. But the concept there was, let's create a very flat organization so that there is no less than 2 degrees of separation from anyone in the organization, so we can have conversations when things come up. I recently saw a book, was listening to the author of a book called Crucial Conversations. I was listening to Joseph Grenny talk, and one of the things that he said that just resonated so well with my experience on Target was, he said, the health of any organization or any relationship or any team is measured by the lag time between when a problem's identified and when it's discussed. If you have that long lag time, you have a very unhealthy culture versus something where people can quickly ask questions and identify and address as problems come up. And that fits into that agility piece. But most important, I think, was the idea of being a mission-driven organization. So we latched on immediately to this idea of being very patient-centric. We were in this for the patient. Everyone in the company had, as most of us in the developed world, had some type of connection to cancer, family member, friend, someone that had suffered or had fought that disease. And so there was a personal element to it. But that allowed the members of the team to have a commitment and to have a drive that was above and beyond the motivation that came from getting a paycheck every week, above and beyond, what additional bullet point I'm going to put on my personal resume. It was bigger than them. And it's something we talk a lot about in healthcare, and I think it really doesn't take on a magical form until people really embody that and take that into their day-to-day actions. I'll give you a quick example. As we were bringing the product to market, we had our first indication in ovarian cancer. And probably about maybe a year after that indication was approved by FDA, we got an outreach from a physician in Brazil. And his wife had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She happened to be a physician as well. And he had heard about a product through some colleagues who had attended some oncology conferences in the US. And so he was asking, can we get access to Brazil? Can we get this product to my wife's procedure? And it wasn't uncommon for the company to get requests like that. He was pretty insistent. There's got to be a way. He was really just, you could see the urgency in his emails and his voice. And I think you could look at that and you could say, hey, we're focused on the US. We have a small team with limited resources. We have to be very focused in what we do. That's off strategy. We can't help out. We would love to help you. We appreciate your situation, but we can't. It's off strategy. We looked at that as a team and we said, we might be able to do this. And it wasn't so much about the strategy, it was about culture. But who are we? And so in making that trade-off, the team went through, and there were a number of people that really latched onto this and went through great lengths to try and figure out how we could find a way to get product to Brazil, get an imaging tower to Brazil in a way that was regulatory above board and in compliance with what governments would require to be shipping pharmaceutical grade product to another country, provide the appropriate training and be on the ground to ensure that it was used the right way, and ensure that everything was really went off without a hitch. And so there's a tremendous amount of work that went through that. And in the end, after all that work, which some might say, hey, that was a disruption, the team looked back at that and they said, you know what? We know we are patient-centric. We know that's who we are as a culture, because look what we just did. And then when you ask them to say, hey, going forward, we need to really push to get, an approval, to get our lung cancer approval, or we really need to push to find a way to make this happen. There was a commitment to go above and beyond and to break down walls, because it was about the patients. And everyone bought into that because we had made that call early on and shown it by our actions. So that concept of being patient-centric, if you're able to embed that in your employees and your culture, and they buy into that, the amount of commitment you get from them is above and beyond. It's 150% what they would do if it was just about the paycheck or about the resume or about the next promotion.
That's amazing, isn't it? That's absolutely amazing. Every health tech, med tech company you see, if you go on LinkedIn, they always have their mission. It's always about the patient. But a lot of companies talk the talk. And when it comes down to a startup who, as you said earlier, the amount of urgency and how important time is, and going above and beyond to ultimately fulfill something in line with your purpose rather than in line with your next milestone, which is obviously incredibly important. That's absolutely amazing. I guess the end of that story hopefully is a positive one, that you were able to do it and everything. Because that must be. Did you have to get approvals in Brazil to be able to provide the product and the system?
Yeah, you absolutely had to get approvals in Brazil because we were importing something that was in a human procedure.
Right.
So there was a tremendous amount of work from a regulatory standpoint to figure out how do we do this in a way, a compassionate use, whatever the Brazilian equivalent of trying to provide product that hadn't been approved to Brazil. Ultimately, procedure happened.
Amazing.
What's exciting for us is we were together in a team offsite, and we had a video that the surgeon and his wife put together. And they were able to essentially say, hey, this is what happened. Like, let us express our gratitude to you for being so patient-centric and for being who you are and how much this means to us. And so it did end well. The surgeon was able to use it effectively, found additional lesions that he wouldn't have seen otherwise, which is not that uncommon when you use this technology, especially in ovarian cancer, which is often late stage. So it added benefit. It did all that we had hoped it would do. And then the team was able to really just take that in, and that became part of who we were. And that was, what did it mean to be part of On Target? That was part of that story.
Unbelievable. What a story. I had a question on something you mentioned earlier on with regards to removing hierarchy and how important it is in early stage companies to drive agility and communication. Um, you mentioned that you had more direct reports than anyone. This is a really interesting concept because I grew up in an industry. Ultimately, staffing is a heavy sales-based industry, and I don't know where this myth comes from, but you're basically taught that 7 direct reports is your peak, and anything more than that, you're stretched, right? I don't know. I don't even know if it's just in staffing. I think it's just sales. It's like 7's the magic number, no more, right? And then I recently seen an interview with Jensen Huang, who's the CEO of
Yes.
Nvidia, and he has over 40 direct reports, and he talks about how they all get on one call every week, and he operates in complete transparency, critical feedback, constructive feedback, guidance, direction in front of everyone. And I found it amazing. I was just like, this is incredible. What are we talking about in terms of, how were you structured in terms of leadership and reports and so forth?
Yeah. You mentioned Jensen. I also love his top 5 things email.
Right.
Right. And so this idea that everyone in the organization is going to share top 5 things with the CEO, a company of that size,
Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic concept.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I did see when I took on the CEO role was it wasn't uncommon for my team, despite nothing coming from me to indicate this would be appropriate or this is the way that we would act. But, well, this is too insignificant to involve the CEO. We're going to talk about this on our own. And so I felt like I was almost disconnected to a degree from
Right.
what's going on. And so there was this need to constantly reach out and to be involved and to sort of bring people in, even though they were people that I've been working with for years. And I think that's a natural human tendency.
Right.
Well, we don't want to get the CEO involved. That would be escalating this beyond what should be escalated.
Right.
But to be a CEO that's effective, you have to be able to understand what's going on the ground. Otherwise, you can't make good decisions. And so I found that to be like his top 5 things was, I thought, just a genius innovation on how do you begin to break down that hierarchy. I had, from an organization standpoint, I had about 10 direct reports, and it was a team of 35. And
Yeah.
so you can imagine essentially every leader of every function reported up into me. And so as a result, I was able to have direct contact with regulatory, quality, manufacturing, chemistry, sales, marketing, and be able to be involved in a much more granular level of what's going on in the organization. I think the other piece too is it's easy to lose sight of the importance of getting out to the field and to being with your reps, of having one-on-ones with the manager that just joined the company periodically, to build that rapport and that connection, so that like those questions you say you have an open policy, they have to feel comfortable they can even walk through that door. And those are things that you do that are small that allow
Mm. Did you find when you became CEO, people who used to talk to you differently? I'm going to say differently. I'm not going to say less.
for sure, absolutely, yeah, because there was a mystique. There was
You're now the boss.
you're the boss, and so now what? I have to. How do I approach him? And so absolutely, there is a clear change.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it? I get objectively, having done the 6 years from early phase through to commercialized product, what would be the sort of key takeaways and lessons learned? Assuming, let's say you're going to go to another innovative, disruptive technology, what are the key sort of top 3 lessons that you would take into the next firm?
Yeah, I would say urgency. You can't underestimate how important urgency is, and there's never a moment to lose. And that would be lesson number one. We have a chairman of our board who's gone through multiple startups, and I love the way he has on his email signature. He signs it "Go, go, go." Doesn't say best. It doesn't say regards. It doesn't say sincerely and says, go, go, go. Because like it just continues to drive this sense of urgency because it's so important. We also talk about how it's sort of the road to building a market, to bringing novel technology to fruition is a bumpy road. Like there are no bumps in the road. That is the road. And so belief and optimism, you have to believe in what you're doing, have complete conviction, and have optimism that you have the team around you that you guys can figure it out. Because I think what I found is the startup world is what I would call a much more authentic experience than what you'd have in corporate America. Corporate America is a very insulated type of experience. It's a 9 to 5 job. You have some moderate highs and some moderate lows.
Yeah.
But ultimately, in the end, it's a very bounded experience. And then when you get into the startup world, you'll have a day where you're on the peak of Everest and you're going to conquer the world, and then you'll have a day where you're walking through Death Valley. And being able to have the belief and the optimism to weather that type of volatility is a critical component to being successful. I'd say third, fail fast, be agile. Like the number one advantage that startups have versus large corporations is they're fast and they're agile. And not taking full advantage of that, you will never be able to overcome the resources, the strength, the brand recognition, the sales force, whatever it might be, of large establishment.
Yeah.
If you're not moving quickly and agilely and pivoting all the time, then
Yeah, awesome. I've one final question on this culture piece. You came from big corp into this firm.
Yeah.
When you were hiring people and looking at people coming into the firm, were you conscious of that, and were you looking at people who had done startups before, or were you looking at people from big corps and maybe assessing them differently and going, I don't know if they're going to make it. It's difficult to make this transition. Like, how did it play into growing the team out?
there's definitely, you have a bias towards people that have done it before.
Right.
Right. I think that's a natural human tendency. Is you look in probably a little bit of a blind spot, quite honestly,
Yeah.
because it's, hey, if you haven't done it before, clearly then you won't be able to do it in the future, which is a fallacy. It's a logical fallacy, but there's a bias there, and I have that bias.
Sure.
I think people that came out of big corp, I think often it was, who are they as a person? That was the determining factor. Are they comfortable in that 9 to 5 insulated environment? Or are they people that are like, I'm just driving to get things done? And they were sort of bouncing against the walls of that closed environment, trying to make things happen. And you can sort of almost see their career sometimes doing that.
Yeah.
Jumping all over the place, just trying to find, it's almost like a pinball, trying to find, their spot. And then they bounce out into a startup world, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, we can take advantage of this energy and this idea of getting things done and being driven to constantly be getting things done.
Yeah.
Those people are highly successful in startups. So we had a mix. We had some people that we pulled out of large corporations, and there's some people that were lifelong startup personalities. But you had to have the right sort of core about you to be successful. And I think we looked at people that came from corporate America with a more of a magnifying glass to make sure that, were they going to survive in this world? Success in that world didn't necessarily mean success in our
Yeah. Awesome. And now the product is live. It's revenue generating through partnership as well. So
Yeah, so the 2 indications for Cytolux, both in ovarian cancer and lung cancer, commercially available, a growing number of enthusiastic, we call them evangelists, but key opinion leaders who are using the product and are quite passionate about what it's done to their practice and done for their patients. So that's all building and growing, and I think is we see that sort of early stage, you have that momentum that you're trying to generate so that you can actually take off. And I think they're right at that point where they're starting to pull up on the landing gear and start to really cruise. So it's quite an exciting time.
that's awesome. It's a fantastic story. It's the story that people want to hear. In that, there's so many people that enter the industry and work for a Stryker, a J&J out of college, and they get their grounding and they stay 10, 15, 20 years, and they have to at some point, and they're probably assessed many times if now is the right time to go, be a bigger fish in a smaller pond and truly test themselves with some sort of innovation, disruptive technology. But it's hard, it's a really difficult decision. And that's why I love to hear these stories, because I think people want to hear the reality, because it's not easy. But there's some incredible success, which is just so much bigger than the story itself, of bringing something to market, being part of something, a team that does something truly innovative. It's fascinating, and it's congratulations for the last 6 years, because it's just awesome.
Yeah, it's been a great ride, and I will tell you, the making that jump to the startup world, I think probably the most rewarding piece of it was a recognition that I was able to have my fingerprints over the entire company. So there's a satisfaction, there's a pride that comes with recognizing that we took something from here and took it to here, and I was able to be involved in every aspect of the company. And that's just a very rewarding, very satisfying thought.
People say they want that. It's very different when you get it. It's yeah. I'd love to have more of an opinion. It's like, okay, that means you actually have to have good opinions. I went from a pretty large firm to a small firm, but the large firm I worked with, I actually joined them when they started, and they grew to over 400 people in under 5 years. It was an incredible journey, but at some point after 10 years I left, and I remember going to my next company, a smaller firm, and I'd obviously gone in at really senior at that point, and week 2 had a contract in front of me, spoke to my CEO, said, right, we need to get this reviewed by legal, and he was like, yep, cool. And I was like, who's legal? And he's like, you. So I was like, okay, yeah, I think I can figure this out. That's all part of it, Ben, thank you so much for coming on. It's absolutely amazing. It's a fantastic story, which I'm sure your peers and future commercial leaders of the industry will love to hear. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do next, and I'd love to have you on again in the future. I'm sure you'll be involved in some really exciting things. But thank you so much for coming on. Fantastic story.
Absolutely, David. Loved it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the show. I hope it was insightful and inspiring. This podcast is brought to you by Levra Consulting. We are a commercially focused recruitment agency focused on medtech and life sciences. If we can help you in your job search, or if you're hiring commercial talent, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, David Philby, or at our website, levraconsulting.com. Thanks again.